What is up, Hardcore Nation? It's Hardcore Christopher here, and today I will be reacting to Top 10 Best Black... Hold on. Top 10 Best Male Black TNA Wrestlers of All Time. That's a mouthful. This video is by Marquis D123, and let's get right into this.
Shove in, man! Main character here. I'm glad to report that I'm on the mend. I don't have the virus, so you can all shove it when you say that. It's all these dirty little people in the gym not spraying the weights with the hand sanitizers. It's made me ill. I go to the gym to try and get healthy, not to try and get sick. Sanitize your weights, people. TNA has never been a company scared to push their black wrestlers. They even built the company around one a few years ago. But they did seriously let down a few of the guys on this list as well. Before anyone complains, this is based on their time in TNA, not what they did in the past or what they did in the future, or what they're gonna do when they're 70-year-old men with 6 wives and a Hall of Fame ring shoved up their asses. So Consequences Creed, for example, won't be making this list, because his time in TNA sucked. I also won't be including many of the current Impact talent, because they have not proved that they...
Well, to be honest, Consequences Creed left TNA to pursue a PhD. Then he went on to WWE to achieve success. So, yeah.
Draw. So let's do it. And remember not to get too upset. And if you do, sharp or I'll smack you one. Number 10, D'Lo Brown. D'Lo was my favourite wrestler during the Attitude Era, and I can't help but think the 2 years that he was properly pushed by WWF were not a long enough period. Things were just never the same for D'Lo after the Droz botch. So when he turned up in TNA in 2002, it was seen as a chance of redemption for him. Lots of ex-WWF and WCW guys turned up in NWA TNA at the start, but hardly any of them had the match quality that D'Lo Brown had. D'Lo teamed with AJ Styles in the early days of TNA, unsuccessfully challenging for the tag titles. But D'Lo and AJ would be involved together for the next year or so, as AJ won the world title and then defended it against D'Lo in a best-of-3 series. D'Lo started teaming with Apollo and they would win the tag titles from Kid Cash and Dallas by disqualification, but they lost them the next week. D'Lo left TNA in 2004 after disagreements over the direction of his character. After competing in All Japan and having a failed WWE return, D'Lo returned to TNA in 2009 as the lead talent agent. For the next couple of years, you would spot D'Lo Brown in pull-apart segments with the wrestlers, but he was clearly just a backstage worker at this point, judging by the size of his belly. Brown became big news again in TNA in 2013, when they were doing a new gut check segment. This segment was a way for new wrestlers to get a contract with TNA, but they had to impress the judges. D'Lo Brown was not originally a judge, but then he poisoned Al Snow and took his place as a gut check judge, joining Taz, as they helped steal a contract for Wes Briscoe. Wait a minute, so all this Hulk Hogan stuff leads back to D'Lo Brown? Right, get him off this list, I'm not having that. Just kidding. D'Lo Brown would be revealed to be the vice president of the Aces and Eights, and Wes Briscoe was also a member. It was a strange reveal because he'd been retired for years at this point. D'Lo briefly returned to the ring in TNA, losing an I Quit match to Kurt Angle. This got him kicked out of the Aces and Eights and he left TNA once again. Well, that doesn't really seem fair. As of 2019, D'Lo Brown is back in Impact Wrestling as a producer, teasing a return of the Aces and Eights at Slammiversary 2020, but we were all let down. Number 9, Adam Pacman. No, it's not, it's Booker T, I'm just messing with you.
I agree with everything he said. I got nothing wrong with D'Lo being on his list. Booker? I will wait until
A lot has been said by Booker about his time in TNA. Let's just say he doesn't look back on it with much fondness. This is unfortunate because if you look back, there were some really good moments, and his run should not be written off so easily. He joined TNA in 2007 after being burnt out with WWE, and his wife Charmel came along with him to TNA. He feuded with Bobby Roode for what seemed like an eternity. It was really about 5 months, but then he turned heel and this suited him much better. He started a character similar to his King of Africa gimmick in WWE, referring to himself as Black Snow. He then brought his own vanity title into TNA, the TNA Legends title, which was a fitting belt to go along with his new gimmick. Booker T then fit perfectly into the main event Mafia, and he won the tag titles with Scott Steiner, as two of the greatest WCW tag champions who were previously massive rivals teamed up. Booker being in TNA helped add star power to their roster, and he could have easily stepped into the main event scene if they had wanted him to. Booker said when he signed for TNA that he would work with the young guys in TNA, and he certainly did that. Yes, he viewed TNA as a bit of a day off, but it was a day off that we all enjoyed watching, and his matches were still good for the best part, so I enjoyed his run. Number 8, Elix Skipper. Probably the most athletic.
There's one problem with that Legends title. Booker never lost it in a match. And Booker didn't really work with any young guys. I mean, besides Robert Roode and besides like AJ Styles, it was pretty much just veterans. But was he the... Is he one of the best male black TNA wrestlers of all time? I don't think so.
Conclusion on this list. Primetime competed on the third NWA TNA show as TNA hired a lot of ex-WCW talents. It didn't take long for Skipper to team up with Low-Ki and Christopher Daniels, and the group was founded as Triple X. It's still fondly remembered to this day by TNA fans. Whilst all three men were incredibly athletic, Skipper probably had the best look, and the fans enjoyed his work in the early days of TNA. Their most memorable feud was against America's Most Wanted, where Skipper performed a cage walk that is certainly one of the top 10 most memorable TNA moments. They would eventually lose a match to America's Most Wanted and be forced to disband. It was sadly all downhill from here, as he was in the terrible Diamonds in the Rough group. When your leader is Simon Diamond, you know you're destined to fail. Anyway, during his TNA run, he held the NWA Tag Team Championship 4 times, so he was an important part of the early days of TNA, despite never being a main character. Do you remember me, sir? Look out! Like I am. Being serious for a moment, Elix Skipper retired from wrestling just after his time in TNA in 2008, as in 2009 his son was murdered. Number 7, Jay Lethal. Lethal didn't...
Okay. That explains why Elix Skipper has pretty much gone dark. No pun intended. I didn't know his son was murdered. It seems like Elix... I think Elix has gone on to better things. But I will agree. Elix was a great time for his TNA career. Now we move on to Jay Lethal, who is by far one of the most successful male black TNA wrestlers of all time.
seemed like he would be much in TNA when he first came into the company in 2006. He had some great wrestling skills, but he struggled to connect with the audience, and he just seemed a bit bland. All that aside, he was properly young at the time, competing regularly on TNA TV at the tender age of 21, when most of you only had aspirations to one day move into your mother's basement. The high point of his early TNA time was challenging Jeff Jarrett for his world title, but coming up short in an entertaining match after interference from Scott Steiner. Lethal would come into his own in 2007 after taking part in Kevin Nash's paparazzi production segments. All the X Division guys would hang out with Nash after the TNA show went off the air, and they would just mess around recording things and competing in wacky challenges like limbo contests and musical chairs. Apparently so much of the stuff that was recorded was so outrageous that it couldn't be aired. I would love to have those tapes. If you want to know more about this amazing time in TNA, click the link on the screen right now. The Hawk promises you will enjoy paparazzi productions. Kevin Nash forced Lethal to compete in a talent contest, where he ended up doing impersonations of Macho Man Randy Savage. Lethal was instantly more likeable and entertaining in this role, and the Black Machismo was born. A lot of non-TNA fans hated on this gimmick as being another cheap TNA rip-off, but a lot of people need to shut up or I'll smack them one.
Dude, you gotta start playing the race card. That's not cool. Dude, play the race card. I've been doing it my whole life. Yeah. I'm sick of waiting.
Lethal even had his own Miss Elizabeth in SoCal Val, who was also in her early 20s, although in my opinion this angle was a bit rushed, as she left Lethal for his nerdy little friend Sonjay Dutt. Lethal was pushed more and more into this new gimmick and held the X Division title 6 times. Some of his reigns weren't the best and they were a bit short and forgettable. He also had one tag title reign with Consequences Creed, now Xavier Woods, in the team known as Lethal Consequences. Once the Hawk flew into TNA, Lethal was relegated to cutting promos about the Hawk's past and referencing wrestlers from the 80s. But Lethal makes this list because when you think of the golden era in TNA, Lethal would be one of the first wrestlers to spring to mind, and he was a perfectly eye-catching wrestler for new fans. I think TNA got as much out of him as they could. Number 6, the Pope D'Angelo De Niro. From a wrestler who was pushed about the right amount to a wrestler that was severely underutilized in TNA. The Pope wrestled in WWE between 2006 and 2009, competing mostly on the ECW brand as Elijah Burke with his MMA gimmick. He did fine in the ring in WWE, but he was lacking in the character department. He won 0 titles and he was released in 2009, despite him starting his future TNA gimmick in his final WWE Dark Match days. When he turned up in TNA in 2009, it went under the radar, as a lot of changes were happening in TNA in 2009. His new name was D'Angelo De Niro, and he was a street preacher pimp, so a bit of a radical gimmick change for him. First of all, I have to say I think his name was a little bit of a mouthful and it held him back. The Pope D'Angelo De Niro. It doesn't exactly roll straight off the tongue. Unless you're in Bridgewater, you don't have a tongue. You don't even have thumbs neither. Anyway, back to the Pope. TNA really let him loose on the mic and he proved to be an exceptional promo. And trust me, sometimes it was hard to get the Impact Zone rocking, but he sure managed it. The crowd organically started the chant of Pope is pimpin', and for a brief time TNA was on the verge of something special with him. The height of Pope's time in TNA was in 2010 when he main evented Lockdown for the world title against AJ Styles. Pope was originally scheduled to win the world title that night, but it was changed at the last minute. The next night RVD beat Styles for the title, as TNA once again pushed the ex-WWE star. Everyone was ready for a Pope world title reign at the time, and we all felt let down. It was all downhill for the Pope from here, as he lost feuds against Mr. Anderson and Kurt Angle. A heel turn did him absolutely no favours, as he was relegated to feuding with Devon Dudley. This feud went on for 6 months and it involved Devon's kids, and the Pope was trying to steal his kids and turn them against his dad. It was completely dumb and it was never explained. Why would he be interested in them? The star had burned out for the Pope, and he left TNA in 2013 with no titles whatsoever, and we were left wondering what could have been for the Pope. Pope turned back up in TNA as a commentator between 2015 and 17, but he didn't really wrestle. For some reason TNA didn't want him to wrestle, but he was continuing to wrestle on the indies and he was not retired. Before you all say it, the Pope has said in interviews since that the Hawk was a massive supporter of his, and his lack of push was not the Hawk's fault. It was also not Vince Russo's fault, and Pope has credited him with coming up with the D'Angelo De Niro name. He also praised what a great writer he is. Pope says that he just blames too many cooks in the TNA creative kitchen. Despite all the negative stuff, Pope still makes the list because he certainly showed that he could main event at any point if TNA just pulled their fingers out. Number 5, Devon Dudley.
Okay, I'm gonna say this. Pope as a commentator sucked. Him and Josh Matthews together they weren't good to listen to. And he said that. Hold on. Okay. Sorry, I had to yawn. He said that RVD beat Styles a night later, and they went with the ex-WWE guy. Even if the Pope won, they were still gonna go with an ex-WWE guy, because when the Pope D'Angelo Dinero was, who was he in WWE? He was known as Elijah Burke.
After leaving WWE in 2005, Devon and Bubba Ray rocked up to TNA. They originally planned on calling themselves the Deadly Brothers to get around copyright, but opted to change the name to Team 3D. Devon and Bubba made history in 2007 when they became the first wrestlers to hold the ECW, WCW, WWE, and NWA titles. It was refreshing to see them actually have to work for the titles though, and it took them almost a year and a half to finally capture the tag belts from LAX in a
That sucked.
electrified steel cage match. TNA started to poke fun at their weight, Bubba more than Devon obviously, but Devon was also forced to weigh in and was included in the fat jokes. I've never really known what to make of Devon's figure. He obviously works out, but there's a lot of fat in there with that muscle. I never felt like Devon deserved all the fat jokes, at least he looks like a wrestler. Let the Hawk know your thoughts. During his time with Bubba and TNA, they amassed 3 tag title reigns, and they also defended the IWGP tag titles in TNA. Several breakups happened with the two, but eventually Devon was on his own for quite a while. He held the terrible TV title twice, and both times it was terrible. But TNA management did trust him to work with a lot of the younger TNA.
Want to know why it was terrible? Take a look at that belt. Take a look at the belt. What is that belt? It's not a new design. It's not a new belt. They took Booker T's Legend title and they just named it the TV champ. They just named it the TV title. Literally, that's what they did. That's what he's holding up.
Talents. He was at his best when he was the first member of the Aces and Eights to be revealed, and because he was unmasked, he had to be the voice of the stable for a while. His heel persona was allowed to shine. He was eventually overshadowed by his brother as usual, who turned out to be the leader of the group. But this isn't a video about him. Bubba can shove it. In 2014, Team 3D were inducted into the TNA Hall of Fame, and for that reason, Devon ranks so highly on this list. When they joined TNA, they helped add some much-needed star power to the show. I can remember a lot of my friends at the time knowing absolutely nothing about TNA, but becoming more interested when they saw that Devon and Bubba were on the show. They were consistent cornerstones to the tag division for such a long time, with Devon totaling 418 matches in TNA. So whilst not the most exciting inclusion on this list, he certainly deserves to be on this list. Number 4, Moose. Moose is the past, the present, and the future of Impact Wrestling. Other than D'Lo, he's the only wrestler on this list to still be contracted to Impact Wrestling, and it's a damn shame that more people aren't familiar with who Moose is. Prior to EC3 rejoining TNA, he was the only legit heavyweight left in TNA, and the only one with any star potential. Much of Moose's early life was spent in professional football, and he didn't get started in wrestling until the relatively late age of 28. He competed with ROH for the first 2 years before joining Impact in 2016. He was at the high point of a show that was clearly on a downward spiral, and Moose was a refreshing addition to the TNA roster. The fans instantly liked him with his catchy fist-pumping Moose entrance and his agile moveset. In fact, it still impresses me that a 6'5" man can do the things that he does. Most Impact fans will tell you that Moose is still with the promotion just due to battering his ex-wife in 2009. None of the happy-clappy wrestling promotions will touch Moose with a barge pole now, despite the incident being over a decade ago. Moose has still not held the TNA World title, and in my opinion the writing team need to get their act together, because him and EC3 should be the main eventers to build the show around. Moose found the old TNA World Heavyweight Championship and has been defending it as if he is the real world champion. Eventually I'm sure there's going to be a unification match with whoever the Impact champion is at the time. And Impact shouldn't look any further than having Moose be the man to win the unified titles. Number 3, Monty Brown. The Alpha Male...
Wait a minute. I don't know much about Moose, but he is a Bill Goldberg. He is he's a Bobby Lashley, Bill Goldberg, and John Bradshaw Layfield.
Look, detectives, I'm bitter. Okay, Bailey left us in terrible
Rip-off, basically.
But he had no insurance, no money.
He calls himself a wrestling god.
Any idea where his car might be?
His moveset is pretty much Bobby Lashley moveset. And he calls himself a wrestling...
I just heard it on the car radio.
A wrestling god. I think I already said that. Oh. And that spear was known beforehand as Spear. No jackhammer needed.
Monty Brown will often top any list for wrestlers that TNA missed the boat on, but for once, he's high on a list that is a positive one. TNA tried to push Monty as a main eventer during their first year in existence, but Monty was lacking the personality, and TNA stopped booking him for a couple of years. After some seizing on the indies, he returned to TNA, but they were more patient with him this time, having him beat jobbers in short television matches. He continued to be booked strongly. He even won the first ever Monsters Ball match against Raven and Abyss. His character developed more and more, as he looked intense, and he started being billed as from the Serengeti. For those of you who don't know, or if your name is Tom, that's in Africa, by the way. His finisher was originally the Dominator, but he started a new finisher called the Pounce, which was a move harking back to his pro football days. This move really helped get him over with the TNA fans. Between 2004 and 2006, he was a welcome face in the TNA main event scene, because the majority of them were washed-up has-beens, and it made Monty's awesomeness stand out even more. Monty had all the tools to become a main eventer, a great look, a believable promo, and the fans were completely behind him. Unfortunately, Brown would hit a glass ceiling in TNA called Jeff Jarrett. As Monty was at his peak popularity in TNA, Jeff Jarrett screwed him out of the title. Instead of seeking redemption against Jeff Jarrett, he formed an alliance with him and his Planet Jarrett faction. During this time, Monty really cooled with the fans, and they didn't like him as a heel. TNA missed the time to strike while the iron was hot. Half a year later, Monty turned on Jarrett and announced his intentions to go after the NWA World title, but it was too late. Christian Cage had just arrived in TNA, and he beat Monty Brown in a #1 contendership match. Christian's time in TNA was great, but it's never mentioned how him turning up in TNA completely derailed Monty Brown. More and more ex-WWE guys would spill into TNA in the next few years. You can't tell me that Brown would have been pushed with Kurt Angle coming into the company. So they missed the boat. The right time was 2004 against Jeff Jarrett. Monty had a brief stay in WWE as Marcus Corvon, but it didn't go well. He retired from wrestling to look after his sister's children, as his sister sadly passed away. Despite never winning the gold in TNA, Brown was a believable main eventer, and I'd have to smack myself one if I missed him out. Number 2, Ron the Truth Killings. If you're just a WWE fan, try to forget everything you know about R-Truth from the last 15 years. As far as you...
Well, to be honest, R-Truth is like a 48-time 24/7 champion, something like that. Let's see, he won the tag titles with Conan when him and BG James, aka Road Dogg, was with when him, Conan, and BG James was known as 3LK. He also won his only main profile championship in the NWA TNA days when he won the NWA belt when he defeated Ken Shamrock. So, R-Truth did have some success.
You know, he's K-Quick during the Attitude Era in 2001, and now he's this guy in NWA TNA that you keep hearing is causing a bit of a stir. Let me tell you, brother, Ron Killings was incredible in TNA, and he was the most believable wrestler on this list, after my number 1 pick. You're just gonna have to wait and see. TNA just gave him a mic and let him be him, and it worked, surprise, surprise. You could feel his passion in every promo that he cut, and the man looked like he was chiseled out of stone, despite not being able to quit smoking. He was the second ever NWA TNA World Champion, and had 2 separate reigns with the belt. He was a refreshing face in the main event scene in his first 2 years, where other than AJ Styles, it was filled with WCW and WWF has-beens. Killings was a man that you could tell lived his gimmick. Before wrestling, he was trying to make it as a rapper, and he was on the streets hustling and met Tupac and Eazy-E. So when he was in TNA rapping and talking about how hard he is, you have to believe it, because he lived all that before wrestling. Those wrestlers who have life experience before coming into the wrestling business are often the most successful because they grew up outside of the bubble and they can bring elements of real life into the wrestling promotion. Truth wouldn't stay on top in NWA for long, as he joined up with the Road Dogg and Conan as the Free Live crew. They were extremely entertaining in the early days of TNA, but in a way being part of this group derailed Killings, and he may have been better without them. His moveset was electrifying and his breakdancing and rapping always entertained the crowd. Talk about being a man of many talents. His time in TNA started to become more and more sporadic as he fell out with TNA management, and it looked like his time in TNA was about to be over, when suddenly he was launched into a tag team with disgraced pro footballer Adam Patman Jones. Check out my video on that team if you want to see it, it's on the screen right now. They quickly won the tag titles as Team Pac-Man, and they held them for 2 months. Contrary to what you've heard about it, it wasn't that bad. It was dumb signing Pac-Man in the first place, and Jones wasn't allowed to be physically involved in any in-ring action. It was just a ploy by TNA to get some media coverage. But Killings made the most of this team somehow, and he made it work. Because Jones was not allowed to do any of the in-ring work, the matches were essentially all handicap matches for Killings, and this made him look like even more of a star, as he beat up 2 men on his own each time.
The girl next door needs stuff. Here!
Time. They started out as heels, but after the first month the crowd were cheering them, because Killings is just far too charismatic and likeable. Once Jones left TNA, it felt like the perfect time to push Killings as a top star once again, but instead he left TNA and joined WWE, and unfortunately now he's regarded as a joke by a lot of people. Number 1, Bobby Lashley. Lashley is the greatest black TNA wrestler of all time, and one of the last legit wrestlers still around in the business today. If he was booked right, he has proper star power and crossover.
Sunday, 9/8 Central, on Ion Television, positively entertaining.
I can't disagree.
Appeal. Yes, he's on the gear before anyone says it, but you certainly can't group him with a lot of the useless lumps who are also on the gear. A lot of these guys could barely move in the ring, but Lashley, despite being massive, still looks athletic as all hell, and he's completely unlike these other big roiders like Rob Terry who can barely tie his own shoelaces. Lashley did appear in TNA between 2009 and 2010, but we aren't including that run in why Lashley is the greatest black TNA wrestler of all time, because if we included that year, it would severely destroy his reputation, and also this list's integrity. I won't really talk about what happened, but he spent the year proclaiming how he couldn't wait to fight Brock Lesnar in the UFC, and that TNA wasn't big enough for him. Now on to why the Destroyer Lashley was amazing. Oh, and by the way, WWE and Samoa Joe stole that nickname from Lashley when he was the biggest beast in wrestling at the time. Lashley returned to TNA in 2014, answering an EC3 Open challenge. At the time, people were a bit underwhelmed with Lashley returning to TNA, as he'd been underwhelming in WWE and TNA before this. Difference is, this time Bobby Lashley was returning from the mixed martial arts world, with a record of 9 wins and 2 defeats.
Well,
You've come a long way since your first tampon. You've navigated adolescence.
to be honest,
You've had babies. And this next phase, you've got this too.
Vince was pushing Lashley as the
Because you have a lot more to do.
as the next Brock Lesnar, because Lesnar had left the company
was twice the limit.
after
Contents include nuts, pretzels, bar mix.
after WrestleMania
Aftermath of a bar fight.
after WrestleMania 20.
Well, they only kill as a last resort.
So now Lashley was bigger than
But he won the ECW title,
Massive skull
and he
fractures,
won
hemorrhage from a blunt
the
fob,
United States title.
a smooth convex edge. You're describing a baseball bat. Poetic
ever with a reputation to back him up. His mic skills could still be a concern, however TNA were extremely intelligent with their booking of Lashley. He joined up with MVP and Kenny King to run roughshod over the TNA roster. MVP was supposed to be the main eventer of the group, and Lashley stepped into his place, with MVP becoming the mouthpiece for Lashley. So now you had one of the best and most gifted legit wrestlers in the business at the time, with one of the best promos at the time. Sounds perfect. Lashley was consistently booked as a fighting champion who was still intelligent despite knowing how great he was. They never had him do anything stupid, and all he did was dominate his opponents, which really helped him in the long run. Even when Lashley was cutting promos on his own, they kept them short and sweet to the point, to cover up his poor mic skills. I actually quite liked Lashley's promos in the end. It was a nice change from a lot of world champions, who drone on for so long that you fall asleep. Lashley didn't have to say much, he just looked legit. With Impact really on the downward spiral at the time, I kept looking at Lashley and thinking, how the hawk is he still with them? He beat Kurt Angle in his final TNA match, giving Lashley even more legitimacy. In Lashley's third reign as the TNA World Champion, he also helped.
And I just thought of this,
private school with him, the Salesian brothers.
but
One of them is now dean of students, the same picture as in Far Rock.
Marky D said something that I don't think is true.
Cardiovascular
He
surgery.
said that Lashley is on
Someone called
the gear, which means on steroids, anabolic steroids to be exact. I just think that's all. I honestly think that's all muscle.
Of the X Division title and the King of the Mountain title at the same time. The guy just looked like such a thoroughbred champion. Lashley was then involved in a tug of war between Impact and Bellator MMA, and this all played out on Impact TV, with Dan Lambert coming in from Bellator, controlling Lashley's decision and trying to talk him out of being in pro wrestling. This was the weakest part of Lashley's run in TNA, plus Dan Lambert was so hateable I just wanted to flatten him whenever I saw him on TV. TNA had to come up with a new nickname for Lashley, as WWE started using the Destroyer for Samoa Joe, so Lashley's new TNA nickname was Walking Armageddon. It wasn't as good. Lashley had a brief fourth reign with the world title before leaving for the WWE. You've got to reckon they had high hopes of him, but unfortunately his booking has not been up to standard, and his run hasn't gone as well as you would expect. I can't believe when I look back at Lashley's time in TNA, and then I go online and look at these losers online hating on Lashley, saying how bad he is on the mic. Get a clue, you goons. TNA were on to something great with Lashley, something you just wouldn't understand. He was going to be a star. If WWE had just done what TNA had done, he would be the biggest thing in wrestling right now. People on the street would actually know who he is, unlike whatever long-haired hippie is the champion at the moment. The average person does not care about these guys. How many wrestlers that are legit are actually out there right now? The answer is not many, so get a clue, WWE. TNA booked him well, and Lashley is 100% without a shadow of a doubt the best black TNA wrestler of all time. And he should be the best black wrestler in the whole of wrestling in this decade. Period.
Okay, guys, that was my reaction to top 10 best male black TNA wrestlers of all time. I hope you all enjoyed. Don't forget to like, because it really helps me out. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because without getting notified, you'll never know when I upload a video, and I upload once a day on the usual, except on Sunday. And don't forget to make your opinions be known down in the comment section below, because I love hearing from all you beautiful people. Also, fun fact, I was looking at my analytics, and did you know that a big portion of my of my viewers are not even subscribed to my channel. Well, to the channel. But anyway, whether you're subscribed, whether you're not, I love all the support. So, without further ado, I am Hardcore Christopher. Keep it hardcore, everyone.